going to be reading from the scripture today for 1 Peter chapter 5, 1 to 11. And now a word to you who are elders in the churches. I too am an elder and a witness to the sufferings of Christ, and I too will share his glory and his honor when he returns. As a fellow elder, this is my appeal to you. Care for the flock of God entrusted to you. Watch over it willingly, not grudgingly, not for what you will get out of it, but because you are eager to serve God. Don't lord it over the people assigned to your care, but lead them by your good example. And when the head shepherd comes, your reward will be a never-ending share in his glory and honor. You younger men, accept the authority of the elders, and all of you serve each other in humility, for God sets himself against the proud, but he shows favor to the humble. So humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and in his good time he will honor you. Give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares about what happens to you. Be careful, watch out for attacks from the devil, your great enemy. He prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for some victim to devour. Take a firm stand against him and be strong in your faith. Remember that your Christian brothers and sisters all over the world are going through the same kind of suffering that you are. In his kindness, God called you to his eternal glory by means of Jesus Christ. After you have suffered a little while, he will restore, support, and strengthen you, and he will place you on a firm foundation. All power is his forever and ever. Amen.
Thanks, Derek. You don't mind me just going to check my Twitter page? That'd be appropriate, yeah? He doesn't care. You know, Peter, in writing this letter that we've been reading, because that letter, because they didn't have Twitter, okay, because they didn't have internet stuff, they had to use letters. And they had to write the letter, and they didn't even have a Stettner machine, to make copies. So they had to have somebody write it out. So I don't know how many people had writing it out, but they would take the letter to different churches, and somebody would have to go. And as they went, they would say, "Oh, I got a letter from Peter to gather everybody, and they'll read it." And that's what they did. They would sit around, and there would be a group of people, and they'd probably call it a house church or a congregation or the family or whoever they had gathered to do it. And they would share information. And I can imagine that the traveler, who we don't know who the travelers were, it's not mentioned in the Bible, who got to carry the letter. But when they get there, they would say, I'm sure they would have said, "Well, how was your trip?" And they would tell them, and they'd say, "How are the friends of the other Christians in the town you just came from?" And they would share their common experiences. And so communication was really important then, and it is now too. And as I was thinking about this, there's a couple of things that we haven't mentioned yet this morning, but thank you, Rachel, for your prayer, because it spun us around the world in realizing how much we're in contact and we're part of a bigger thing. And I did get a Twitter yesterday from the folks at Canadian Baptist Ministries, and they were kind of excited because they wanted everybody to know that something went on in the news in part of the world that seems so far away, and it seems so evil and so wrong and so hurtful that we just go to the other news stories. It's the Syria thing, where so many refugees are coming out of Syria, and so many people have lost their homes and their lives, and they're coming into Lebanon. And it happens that Canadian Baptists have missionaries in Lebanon, placed in a really important part of that whole system. And the text yesterday, or the Twitter yesterday, said that They wanted to know, let us know, us Canadian Baptists know, that over $500,000 of our giving have been spent on the refugees coming from Syria into Lebanon and to look after them. And I just thought that I would want to share that with you. And because that's amazing that Canadian Baptists, us, are in those news stories in such a powerful way. The other thing is that a couple of weeks ago, Phil was up here in front of the microphone. Doug and Phil, a good friend. My brother Phil was here from High River, and he told us about some of the needs there. And you folks have responded in tremendous ways, and I'm sure Brad will let you know the figures later on in the summer. But news from there is that this morning, the First Baptist Church of High River is meeting at, well, I don't know the time change thing, but they're meeting in the morning at 11 or so in the Alliance Church. And the Alliance Church is having their service, moved their service to earlier in the morning, and they're letting their building be used by First Baptist Church to meet there. And so, and then I think the Salvation Army is using the Alliance Church in the evening. So this terrible devastation that happened in southern Alberta, as we watch, we get to see incredible, loving, and kind gifts. Oftentimes the CBC forgets to say, and these people will be being real generous are from the Baptist church somewhere or some other church, but good things are happening as people share together. And this letter that Peter wrote, I hope that I've got across to you in the last few weeks how that this letter isn't just for those people that Peter was writing to. They're for followers of Jesus everywhere, and the words are words of encouragement. We like encouragement, don't you? Don't you like it when somebody, instead of telling you all the bad things that are happening in their lives, they ask you how it's going, and they say, well, cheer up, or it'll get better, or something like that. Words of encouragement are wonderful. We all need encouragement. And Peter's reminded his readers who they are as followers of Jesus. And I'm not going to try to give a review of the book of 1 Peter, because we only sort of landed a little bit in each chapter, and you should read it and get a commentary and read that too, and learn more about how Peter did this, of encouraging the followers of Jesus. He encouraged them by telling them who they were. He said they're chosen people. We are chosen people. We're special people, called to be a people as followers of Jesus. Very distinct from everybody else now. And you hear that lots when you come to church, that as followers of Jesus, we shouldn't be exactly like our neighbor. We need to be different. We need to be changed. In fact, the very definition of being a follower of Jesus is that we've decided to follow Jesus. Not decided to like Jesus or to say that I go to the certain church, but to actually find out where Jesus is going and what Jesus would do and then follow it. So Peter did that, and then he seemed to there's lots of things in the book that we've read, but it seemed every time he would come down to this very simple thing that as followers of Jesus, the way we are different is that we really, really practice this idea of putting others first. He said, well, that's not so different. I learned that in Sunday school. Right. But I said, really, really practice it. Right? That every situation that we get ourselves in, we don't jump in there and say, what's in it for me? We think of the other person first, and what a difference that makes. Another thing that he talked lots about in this letter, and because it was in a context writing to people who were out of place, like those refugees that we just mentioned coming out of Syria, they lost their home. The people that Peter was writing to were spread all over the Mediterranean. And they were followers of Jesus, and they would be encouraged by these words that God is with you and He's looking after you. But Peter talked a lot about suffering, that it was going to get worse even. And he was warning them that being a follower of Jesus often will mean suffering. Now, when we talk about that, and I try not to minimize this part about our kinds of suffering as opposed to theirs, you may be feeling as much pain as they felt? I don't know. But the people that that Peter was writing to were displaced people. And not only that, in very few years after they received this letter, and Peter was warning them, saying that suffering is going to get worse, their political system, the Roman government, went a little more haywire and started blaming the Jews for all the Jewish people and the Christian people for all their problems, and it became a persecution that, well, it's famous for people being thrown to the lions as entertainment. Instead of football games, they would have, and throw their football, they would throw Christians in there with real lions. And well, they had reasons to fear. But Peter wrote encouraging words. How do you write encouraging words when you're telling somebody that they're going to suffer? You tell them that there are ways to help. There's some things that we should be thinking about in the midst of our pain and suffering. And that, therefore, applies to you and I, too. So we need to have clear thinking. Clear thinking meaning we can put things in order. So often, suffering takes all the order out of our lives. We can't think clear. Just got to get through the day. Whether it's our suffering or our suffering that people are telling us about, it just confuses, it fogs our minds. And Peter wants us to have clear thinking in the midst of this. So he's been talking to specifically to different people. A few weeks ago, in the chapter 3, he talked to tax collectors. No, actually, it was in chapter 2. He talked to taxpayers, people who were citizens in the government. He said, obey your authorities. And then he talked, too, about households, and he talked, too, about being employees. Honor your employers by respecting them, obeying them. And then he went to the household and talked about wives and husbands submitting to one another. So all these things were to help followers of Jesus to think more clearly so that God could enter into their lives and focus them and help them out. This morning, Linda would say that's about the longest introduction you've ever had. They're halfway through and I haven't got the first point. But I'll speed up, okay? Because this morning, in this wonderful passage, he seems to, again, focus on certain elements. And he says, a word to you who are elders. And it would probably, in this case, the word elder and the word church, in our context, bring things to mind that maybe weren't in that situation there. There wasn't particularly a structure set up yet, so it might be better. A word to you who are mature leaders in your groups of Christians. Okay, that's really what he's talking about. People who are seen as mature leaders. The ones who have thought these things through and get called to the front or get the microphone or whatever they use to honor the person who's going to talk. That would be passed to them, and they would share or give leadership. Or when they're sitting around deciding who they're going to help, that person would say, well, I think we should do this. Not necessarily that they had been given a position, but they were mature leaders. But, again, to help the clear thinking in the midst of the suffering, these groups of followers of Jesus needed some help. And so Peter helps them straighten it out. You wonder who he's talking about when he says, who's a leader? And for us this morning, we need to realize that, yes, we do have leaders that come up to the front. We do have leaders that we pay, like our pastors. And we do have leaders that we elect. But in this situation, this reapplies to them, but it also applies to everyone in the sense that we're all leaders, because anyone who has someone else watching them, you got that? Anybody else who has someone watching them in our Christian circles is a leader, or at least needs to have the preparation and the expectations are put on those people of leaders. So, you think somebody's watching you? You go, okay, I think I know somebody's watching me. And they're actually older than me, but they're watching me in
how I live my Christian life because they haven't made a decision for Christ yet. In fact, they're a little bit cynical, but they're watching me. So anyone who has someone watching them needs to pay attention to these words that Peter has about being in leadership. There are helpers and there are needy people. There are people who care for themselves and there's people who care for others. And Peter saw that in those groups, there must have been a little bit of a problem with authority, so he has some important words for them. Because when people get in a place of authority, we know what happens. Sometimes they get a little puffed up and think, okay, if I'm making this decision, people have asked me to make this decision, then everybody else butt out. You're not going to say that every time, right? But you're going to feel like it. Like, what's it their business? I've already made that decision. And then, it just wears us out, too, when we see people like that. Or maybe even you've been like that sometimes, where you've been asked to make a decision, and so it can make one. And it costs you, because it's hard to make decisions, and I'm respected and honored. And then somebody comes along and says, well, I don't think that's a good idea. And they didn't even get asked to make the decision. Well, I can imagine that those people in Peter's day were just kind of like us. It happened to them too. So Peter had these things to say about leaders and being careful about what goes on. So he says, I appeal to you. It's a big issue, he says. He says, because I'm a follower, I'm a mature leader, because I've witnessed Christ's sufferings, and I'm suffering too in the same way you are. He says, listen to me. And he used the word appeal. He says, I appeal to you. And then as if it's something that's really going to be hard to do or shocking. He says, care for the flock. He says, here's my concern, this is in the message, that you care for God's flock with all diligence of a shepherd. Wow. So we're leaders in the sense that people are watching us. So people are watching us and seeing how we're going to react in the suffering that goes on, or in the problems that come in life. But then, when they're watching us, are we supposed to show off and make sure that we perform right, and then we'll be more honored leaders? Well, that's not where Peter's going here. He says, actually, those people that are watching you, you need to take care of them. And what better illustration? Jesus used it lots, and it was part of their culture, and they were a little closer than our culture. I don't know if you know any shepherds or eat sheep. I guess you don't eat sheep. You eat something else. Mutton. Okay, never mind. We don't know much about sheep. That's my point, okay? But this idea of taking care of people, we do. And Peter says that if you have people watching you, the people that God has entrusted to you. Now, he's talking a little bit in a formal sense in this text, but for you and I want to take that formality out of it. Because I want you to feel how you can be encouraged and how you can have clear thinking about your relationship with God in the midst of suffering. You realize that people are watching you, you have a responsibility, and the way you handle it is be like a shepherd. Find out where other people are going or where their hurts are, and think about them first. He's going back to the same thing. He says, care for those that God has entrusted to you. Watch over them willingly, not grudgingly, not for what you can get out of it. It's so easy to make that switch. Because it seems that that's part of our naturalness, to take any given situation, and if you're really good at always making things sunshiny and happy, it may be the way you do that is make it picture it how it's going to turn out good for you. And that's, as long as you're careful with that, it's not so bad. But what Peter's saying, and must have heard, and I don't think we're wrong to presume and think into these situations. But if Peter's preaching about it, it must have happened. There must have been some people who were leaders who had people that were depending on them, and they were being watched, and they shouldn't. They weren't caring for the other person. They seemed to be only caring for themselves. And then worse, when they did do it, they were grumpy about it. They said, "Oh, it's not my turn anymore. I've been doing this for a long time. How come I have to do it?" Now, I don't know if that's exactly what they said, but Peter had to respond to it. He had to write in a letter that we have 2,000 years later about these people doing it grudgingly. That means they were whining. They were leaders. They knew that they were supposed to be caring for somebody, but they whined about it. I don't know about you, but there's a special thing that happens to our bodies when we hear people whining. It's coming out right from the bottom of the back and goes right up the top. Why were they whining all the time? Linda and I, she mentioned that we were in Bolivia, and it's just the cultural thing with the Bolivian ladies in the market. They use the voice that I don't think in the Bolivian culture sounds like whining. But in the Canadian culture, it really, really sounds like whining. Like, "Can you buy from me, please?" and stuff like that. Right? And so it kind of got to us, and we'd say, "Why is it we don't like going shopping there?" Well, after a while, we didn't hear it so much as whining, because I don't think they really were, but that whining business. And so Peter wants these people, these leaders, to make sure that when they do it as if they're doing it for God. And so you put away that emotion of what's in it for me, because that's where the whining comes from. That's where the doing it grudgingly comes from. It says, because if your motives are right and you check on those things, you're thinking clearly about your relationship with those people that are watching you, that you're responsible for. Care for them like you would care for the sheep, and do it from an open heart. Like what they care about matters to you. When that happens, everything changes. And the way he says it, because you are eager to serve God. And then he says, don't lord over the people assigned to your care. Wow. He's going right to the point here in terms of bad forms of leadership. If you have an opportunity to be a leader, and you have to tell people, well, you have to tell them the reason they have to listen to you is because you're the leader. If that's your message, then you need to get on with the real message about what you're supposed to be doing. Not arguing about whether you're the leader or not. You know, like people say, I'm the boss, just do it because I told you to. That doesn't really build good relationships. So Peter had to say, don't lord it over them. And then he says, instead of proclaiming you're the boss all the time, show them how to do it so that you change their motives. And the way you do that is show the example how you've changed your motives. You're doing it as if to serve the Lord, and they're watching you, remember? That's what leadership is. They're watching you, and they're going to follow the example. They're not going to go with the plan because you're the boss. They're going to go with the plan because they see you going with the plan. What a refreshing thing that Peter has to say about being leaders. And then he goes on, and just in one little sentence, because he started saying, you mature leaders, and he must have thought, oh, there's a whole lot of people that aren't so mature. So he says, and you younger ones. He says that in verse 5. He says, in the same way, you younger men must accept the authority of the mature leaders. But then quickly he goes on and says, all of you, serve each other in humility. Wow. But all of you, leaders and followers alike, this is what the message says, are to be down to earth with each other. Kind of a definition of humility, isn't it? Down to earth with each other. For God has had it with the proud, but takes delight in just plain people. So, in the communities that Peter was writing to, because they had to get together And when they got together, they either had to eat or they had to make a plan about how to go out and share the gospel with other people. There was a plan that had to be followed. And when there had to be a plan, then they had to say, well, which plan are we following? So when you do that, you ask the guy who talks lots or has lots of experience to get up there and make the decision. Or everybody raise their hand, and somebody's got to count the hands. You know how leadership goes that way. So they had some organization. And organization isn't wrong. We just don't need to be ruled by it or controlled by it or change who we are. That's what Peter's saying here. If you have leaders, the leaders are to lead as if they're serving God. That they are serving God with that. And they lead by example. Not just telling other people to do it. So, but he gets to the core. He says, everybody needs to serve with humility. We sang this morning, humble yourself before God. And what is humble? How do we? Some of us need teaching on what humility might be, and others need teaching on the opposite. And so Peter helps us here. Right after he says, humble yourselves. So humble yourselves in the mighty power of God. And he says in verse 6, so be content with who you are. Don't put on airs. Wow. Isn't that a good definition of humility? Being content with who you are. Now that backs us up to this business of clear thinking. And if we're in the midst of suffering, it's hard to have a clear mind and be clear thinking. But remember who you are. And be content in who you are. When you do that, then God can use you. So be content in who you are. Don't put on airs. Don't try to be somebody you're not. Remember that God's strong hand is on you. He'll promote you at the right time. What a wonderful word of encouragement. And then he gets to that famous verse that you all memorized when you were really little. And maybe some of the little kids here this morning remember. He cares for you. Remember I had to learn that? Rocky? Or did you forget it? It's only little verses. In fact, it was hard to remember 1 Peter 5. What was it? 1 Peter 5, 7b. It's hard to memorize that part than the words. He cares for you. So in our being content and understanding who we are, we give all our worries and cares to God. God is going to take care of us. And as that sinks in, there's no better word of encouragement for those people then and us now. That no matter what the circumstances are, God is going to take care of us. What a wonderful word that Peter has for us. Quick reminder, though, he brings up this part about you may remember that God cares for you, but the way it's going to be attacked most is by Satan putting other things into your heart and mind. So you need to be aware, your clear thinking needs to include that we're in the midst of a spiritual battle. And he makes it pretty clear. If you have trouble with this, picturing Satan like as the lion, and you really like C.S. Lewis and Narnia and Jesus being like the lion, really don't go there. Don't get all mixed up about that, because Peter says that Satan is roaring around like a lion, looking around for people who would be bad leaders or thinking that they're not cared for. All these kinds of things. That's what Satan's looking for, and then he pounces. And the way he pounces is to give you bad thoughts, give you thoughts that you're not being cared for by God. That's what gets us down more than anything else. And then we get afraid. And I know that English-speaking people have a real tough time, unless you've been brought up on Dora the Explorer, to handle new Spanish phrases. But Ray, you learned the three-word one, no temo ya. I'm not afraid. No saying, oh yeah, I'm not afraid. And if you keep saying that, and recognizing that you're not afraid because God is caring for you, then Satan, you have no reason to fear the roaring lion, the pacing lion. God is taking care of you. You have nothing to fear. Peter says, stay alert and watch out for him. That alertness is that clear thinking that we're to have. Stand firm against him. Be strong in your faith. And then he mentions that beautiful thought that you may be feeling bad about all the things going on in your life, but think of the Christians around the world, and maybe that'll help a little bit. But I'm not sure how much that helps, but Peter says it does. It takes our minds off our own problems when we're aware of the problems of others. And so he puts that in there. Then, the wonderful word of encouragement at the end of this passage. He says, in his kindness, God called you to share in his eternal glory by means of Jesus Christ. This is all about our relationship to God through Jesus Christ. Everything's different because of that. And listen to how it builds. He says, God called you to his eternal glory by means of Jesus Christ. So after you've suffered a little while, he will restore you, he will support you, and strengthen you, and he will place you on a firm foundation. Go through suffering. When we go through those times of doubt, of stress, of feeling far away from God, we do need restoration. We need to be reminded that God cares for us. We need to be reminded of all the details of what Christ has done for us, how God has shown his love. That's the restoration. And then he says, God will support you. I like that. He doesn't say, I'll restore you and then you're going to have no more brain, no more heart. You just do what you're told, get in line and follow straight through. No, he supports you in who you are. He created you to be very special. You're chosen people. You are a people. And he will support you as you serve him. So he restores us and supports us. And then he says, Peter says, he will strengthen you. Folks, in our walk with the Lord, nothing is more discouraging than being worn out. For whatever reason, whether it's a Satan-infused thing into our hearts and our minds, we feel weak. The word here of encouragement is he will restore us, he'll support us, and God will strengthen us. And then he says, we will have a realization that the ground we're standing on is firm. Because it's God's ground. It's the story of Jesus. It's the gospel. He gives us a firm foundation. And from that firm foundation, then we can go out and be useful for him. What a beautiful word that he gives us. All power to him forever. In another version it says, he gets the last word. God has the last word on this, on our restoration, our support, our strength, and our firm foundation. Folks, grab on to the words of encouragement from the gospel, the letter from Peter to us. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for your love. Thank you for your words of encouragement for our lives today. You know what's going on in our hearts. You know the weakness we feel. You know the confusing things that keep us from thinking clearly. You know our stress. Lord, we turn all those things over to you to accept your loving care for us. We simply want to trust you, Heavenly Father. In Jesus' name.